Start by removing the door card by taking out the 4 bolts that hold the grab handle. I'll be using this trim removal tool that's very handy. Just go around the edges of the door card, pulling away with one of the tools and then prying out the plastic rivets. Once you popped all the rivets out, you need to pull the card up a few millimeters and then slide it out. Here you can see the 9 plastic rivets that popped out. There's 8 along the edges of the door card. There's 1 that fell out. I put them back in. And then you can see the 1 in the middle that pops up. This is the rear door without the trim. Now we're going to remove the trim on the rear panel that's next to the door by using the trim removal tools and just popping out the securing latches that's inside. This is the rear panel without the trim. Here you can see the cable you're gonna have to be careful with. And then you need to pull away the plastic speaker cover so that you can see the rivet area that you're going to be working on. Next, you need to remove these 6 bolts that hold the old rear wheel carrier. That's going to come off when you take those bolts off. And you're going to keep the hardware that you removed because you're going to use it again to install the new rear door frame. We've removed the 6 bolts, and on the outside you can see that we have removed the old rear wheel carrier, thanks to my beautiful assistant. This is the new rear door frame that we're going to attach to the rear door. The 4 holes goes to the top and the single hole goes to the bottom. To make it easier to hold the frame, I first put the 6 bolts through and then I use some silicone sealer so that we can seal the holes in between the plate and the door. We then use the previous hardware to reattach the 6 bolts. Next, we attach the piston holder to the rear door frame. Make sure you leave the bolts a little loose so that you can move the piston around. Next, we're going to attach the lower bracket to the rear cross member by identifying the 4 bolt holes that we're going to be using. These brackets use captive nut plates that go behind the rear cross member. The flat part goes towards the front, and where the nuts tie into goes towards the back. So you just put it behind the cross member and you align it with the bolts where the first 2 bolts go in. Next goes the other captive nut plate on behind the rear cross member, also the flat part looking towards you, and you just slide it in and you align the holes of the bracket with the holes where the captive nut plates go. Here you're putting the M8 bolts with the washers. To attach the top bracket, you need to drill 2 holes And I covered everything with masking tape except the rivets where the holes are going to be drilled out. The angle part of the top bracket goes towards the door and the flat edge next to the door. I used a small drill bit to make a pilot hole and then the 7/16 big drill bit to do the 11mm hole for the M10 bolts. The top bracket also uses a captive nut plate that goes in the inside of the panel with the flat part looking towards the panel. We're using two M10 bolts with a washer. We're also going to be using the silicone sealer in the holes that we drill and on the bolts to make a tight seal. Next, you put the tire carrier frame in the brackets by putting the large flat washers in between the brackets and the carrier. Here you can see we put the bolt. This is the M12 bolt with a washer, and then the two metal washers in between the bracket and the poly bushings. Then we put another washer and a nylon lock nut. I'm using some silicone lubricant in the poly bushings. The two large flat washers go in between the bracket and the bushings. Next, you tighten everything down, but leave enough slack so that the tire carrier can swing in and out. Here we're putting the piston and doing the alignment as per the instructions, where the bolt of the piston has to be centered in the slot of the tire carrier frame. Once centered, you tighten everything down. You make sure the rubber washer is on the inside of the piston next to the tire carrier. Then you put the metal washer and then the nut, and you tighten everything down. Not too tight because you don't want to destroy the rubber washer. Last step is to put the locking nut and tighten it down. And this is the final product. I did use a backing plate before loading my spare tire onto the wheel carrier.